Hey team, Andre from High Performance Academy here. Welcome along to another one of our webinars. Today we're going to be diving into traction control, and we're going to be talking about what it is. Probably pretty self-explanatory, but some of the applications around how it can and probably should be used, some of the implications of using it. Today we will be focusing on the Motec M1 platform, but a lot of what we're going to be talking about today is relatively generic information that will work irrespective of what brand of ECU you're using. Before we get into that though, just a little bit about what's been going on over the last couple of weeks here at HPA headquarters. And for a start, I want to talk about our latest giveaway. This time, the team at Holley in the US have teamed up with us, and they have given us one of their Terminator X Max ECUs. This is pretty much what you'd expect from any high-level ECU. It comes complete, equipped with onboard wideband lambda drive-by-wire throttle control. It also has automatic transmission control for some of the popular factory automatic transmissions that we find particularly behind for the likes of the LS vehicles, which is relatively unique and quite helpful because it makes it essentially a one-stop shop in terms of controlling not only your engine as well as your automatic transmission. So we've got that ECU, and so that you know how to install it and how to tune it, we are also adding in HPA VIP membership. At VIP membership, if you are not aware, that gives you access to every single course that HPA currently offers, as well as every course we ever release in the future for no cost, obviously, because we're giving it away. You'll also get lifetime gold membership access that gives you access to our webinars and our forums. Total value on there around about $3,000 US. So I'll get Scott to drop a link into the comments you can follow to get your name into the draw. 29 days left for that giveaway to run. It is a really great package, great value there, so I would urge you to get your name into the draw. Zero cost to get involved. You don't need to purchase anything. I'll also mention that there are a few other tasks that you can complete in order to get yourself a few more entries into that draw as well. Give yourself the absolute best chance. And I'll also mention that irrespective of whereabouts you are in the world, we will ship that ECU free of charge to your door. So don't think you're going to miss out if maybe you live in Antarctica. Doesn't matter, we will ship it to your door. Right, a little bit of an update on our SR86, and we are just a few days away now from the fourth and last round of the South Island Endurance Series, and unfortunately we will not be there. Seems that this car is battling us the whole way, and I don't really want to be showing you internal engine components, yet here we are. This two-piece main bearing cap is actually intended to be single piece, believe it or not. So yeah, our last event didn't go very well. We didn't actually end up doing the race itself. In practice, basically from the time we rolled out of the pits, we were battling issues with the car. Something just wasn't quite right. Car ended up having a bit of a harshness to it, which developed into a vibration that got worse during the day, and also ended up with an oil leak. Ultimately, it was no surprise why. The team did put in a stellar effort to get to the bottom of this at the track and see if it was something that we could fix, repair, but sadly that wasn't the case. So jump across to my laptop screen. This is essentially what we found after dropping the sump at the track. So we can see we've got 5 of these main bearing caps, and I think off the top of my head 3 of them were cracked in half. We also can see these massive significant cracks running through the alloy girdle or cradle that gets bolted between the block, the top of the caps I should say, and our ARP main studs. So obviously not what we wanted, pretty much goes without saying. When we got the engine back to the workshop here, obviously we weren't going to be fixing this at the track. We got the engine back to the workshop, and actually it got stuck into it in a little bit more detail. It became obvious just how bad this was. So you can see here, massive crack through the number 4 and number 5 main bearing area on the block itself. 1, 2, and 3 were unscathed, but there's the back of the block, and you can see that crack running through the block where the rear main bearing bolts down. So obvious question is, why has this happened? And unfortunately, as is often the case with things like this, we can't give you a clear answer right now. There's a range of different potential options. The argument we're obviously going to get from a lot of people is, well, you should be running billet caps, and we are going to run those in the future, but I'll still hold strong here that the power levels we're running, 450 wheel horsepower, billet main caps 100% are not necessary. We know multiple teams and people running these engines well beyond those power levels with stock caps, so that shouldn't be a necessity. We're swapping to them, as I'll talk about in a moment, simply because obviously after having a failure like this, almost irrespective of power level, we don't want the chance of it happening again. But I will still hold strong that at 450 wheel horsepower, definitely it isn't a requirement. However, there are some other aspects around this that may have contributed. For a start, the 6-speed sequential gearbox we were running prior to switching to the TTI, prior to switching to the Hollinger paddle shift, so the TTI we were running, we did battle initially some high-speed vibration with that particular gearbox. We went backwards and forwards with TTI with that, and they did definitely improve it, but we ran the engine for a significant amount of time with what was quite a bad vibration, particularly top of 5th and into 6th gear. So that vibration being transferred through the engine block essentially, obviously it's not going to be overly great for anything. That particular gearbox, when we were running it initially behind our 1UZFE, just to give you some concept of those vibrations, initially it was so bad that basically top of 6th gear, 240 kilometers an hour, you couldn't actually see out of the mirrors. It was that bad. That also resulted in some damage to components on our 1UZ, including the alternator bracket was fractured twice. We also ended up with cracks in our alloy intake manifold, and obviously components like this don't like being exposed to high levels of vibration. So again, TTI went some ways towards rectifying that vibration. Certainly wasn't anything like I was just explaining when we had the SR20 in there, yet here we are, we still had that. So that's one particular possibility. The other one is just possible age and life of the existing block that was a donor block. So we used a Nissan S13 block, and obviously we don't have knowledge on how that block was used in its past life. So we're getting these blocks now. They're pretty old, and a lot of them are used with some questionable modifications, questionable tuning, and obviously it could be a block that was simply relatively stressed, and we were starting out with a bad starting point. We just don't know. So moving on, however, we are obviously not going to take the risk of this happening again. And the components were fitted here. If we jump back to my laptop screen, we're going with a set of billet steel caps from Plasmaman, as well as their Plasmaman billet alloy girdle, which basically ties everything together. It actually ties the caps into the outside of the sump rail. So if I just draw around here, that's actually linking into the outside of the sump rail, so it actually really ties the whole block together, whereas the factory cradle doesn't do that. All it does is it ties the main caps number 1 through to 5 together. So this should do a better job of stabilizing everything. It's a bit of a pain in the ass, to be perfectly honest, though, because in order to do this, the block does need to be a line bored and then honed through that main bearing tunnel. You can't just go and bolt these caps on and hope for the best. The main bearing journal has to be at exactly the right size, and we want it perfectly round, and all of them need to be concentric as well. Otherwise, you're going to basically instantly end up with bearing failure. So unfortunately, due to an error with the machining that was done on these, we are behind the 8 ball, and we don't have the block back in time to get us to this last round of the race series, which is a real shame. We obviously started out really well with a win at Highlands. We're on a high there, couldn't have gone better. Dream run with the car, was faultless. We had a suspension component failure at round 2 in Timaru. Unfortunate, considering we did retire the car from the lead of the race, albeit only on lap 2, so a lot of racing was still left to go. Round 3, Teretonga, we didn't even get to the start line because of this failure during the practice day, and now round 4, we are unfortunately going to sit out. So it seems like the racing gods are not shining on us. We have had, I believe, more than our fair share of troubles with this particular car. Unfortunately, though, I've been in the industry now for 20 years, and every now and then you get a problem car and it seems to go out of its way to cause you misery and heartache, and that is where we are. But we will continue to battle on. Please don't let me know in the comments that we should case swap it. I've lost track now of the number of people that have mentioned that, and I'll just cover that off quickly so that you don't need to mention it in the comments when this makes it to YouTube. We have no particular affinity or love for the Nissan SR20 VE engine. I do also admit that the K series is an excellent engine. Couple of things. First of all, for the K lovers out there, K series engines are great, but also have their own set of issues, as does every engine when we're running reasonable power levels, and particularly the endurance aspect is an issue here. It's very easy to run a car on the street or on the dyno at just about any power level. You can also do that for a sprint race, which is only maybe 5 to 8 laps. When you're starting to beat up on the car for an hour plus, that is a whole different ball game. So yeah, every engine has its own peculiarities and little issues that you need to overcome. The key aspect though that people probably wouldn't be aware of when they're mentioning, hey, you should have just case swapped it, is when we originally put that SR20 engine in the car, we were under a very tight time frame. We had 4.5 weeks to get the car racing for last season. The only reason we ended up putting that SR20 VE turbo motor into the car was because we had it there built in the workshop. There is absolutely no way we could have sourced a K series engine, built it to suit a turbo application, got it in the car, etc, etc. So that's just a little bit of background information to save you jumping into the comments there. Right, I just want to also show you quickly one of the things that became apparent later on as to exactly what was going on out on the racetrack. So we'll jump over to my laptop screen. It's just some simple data from the practice day where we had the failure. So this is our first lap here. I'll just circle that. And we're only just getting out of the pits, essentially, starting to get some heat into everything. And we've got the oil pressure being displayed here. So the oil pressure is always going to work, going to move up and down a little bit relative to our engine RPM. Rough rule of thumb I like to try and abide by is 10 psi of oil pressure per 1,000 RPM. And if we look at that, we are probably a little bit high. I'll just choose that location there, 6,000 RPM. We've got 87 psi. That is because the oil temperature straight out of the pits is still relatively cold. So once we're at to operating temperature, we're there or thereabouts that rule of thumb. So when we come onto our second lap here, this point right here is where things went pear-shaped, and we see that plummet in the oil pressure. Now, it's a tough one because if we look at what the oil pressure dropped to, at a particular point there, 40 psi, and we're at 6,700 RPM. It's definitely low, don't get me wrong, but it's not zero, it's not 15 or 20 psi. And we can see that we also have the oil pressure sort of coming back up occasionally, back up to 85 psi. But that particular point there, from then on in the session, basically we had lower oil pressure. So how that's basically come to pass is the caps broke, the block cracked, as you've already seen those photos of. And what that does is essentially allows a significant increase in oil leakage. So the oil has a freer path to flow back into the sump, so it doesn't have to work so hard, and that's why the pressure drops. And because everything's flexing and moving around depending on the amount of power and RPM being placed on the engine, the oil pressure is varying. So that's a key indicator that obviously things weren't right. This also showed up as an oil leak, and the reason for that is the back of the crankshaft was now no longer completely supported. That allowed it to move down, and doesn't need to move very much, just a few thousandths of an inch, and that's enough for the rear main seal to end up damaged and leaking. So all clear signs obviously in the end, but at the time it's hard to obviously correlate this with the data that we're seeing with, well, obviously we've got a cracked block. That's not always that easy to piece together, but as the day went on and we were testing various things, things ended up getting more significant. The cracks got worse, and obviously the problem became very apparent. So it's a little bit of insight into what went on there. All right, let me get back to my notes here for a second. All right, I just wanted to briefly touch on a post we put up on our Instagram a little while ago, and if you aren't following us on Instagram, please make sure you do so. We're HPA 101. We try and post up regular, interesting and educational content, and this is a photo that we took back when we visited Mountune in the UK back in 2019 when we went to Goodwood Festival of Speed. And this is one of their World Rallycross engines. And the part of interest here is this anti-lag system. So I've just circled the components that are involved here. And I'll start by just talking about how conventional anti-lag systems work. So nothing new, it's been on rally cars for decades now. And conventionally, how anti-lag systems work is that it involves bypassing air around the throttle body. Now, this can be done with an auxiliary air bypass valve or physically by opening the throttle. This is done either with throttle kickers or with drive-by-wire. We can physically open the throttle. Along with this, obviously, if we just bypass air into the engine and add fuel, the engine's simply going to make more power and the RPM's going to climb. With rally style anti-lag, this is an off-throttle anti-lag, which is trying to aid boost response by keeping the turbocharger spooled. So when the driver gets back on the throttle, they've got instant boost response. So very different to a drag style launch control anti-lag. I prefer to refer to that as two-step just to avoid confusion between the two systems. But the problem with a conventional anti-lag system is that if we want the anti-lag to be more effective, it requires more air being bypassed around the throttle body. Now, in order to combat the fact that normally more air bypass would simply end up in a higher engine RPM, we also retard the ignition timing dramatically. That it causes the combustion event to occur very late in the engine cycle into the exhaust stroke. And we also do cutting to various cylinders as well to control the speed. So if we want to get a really aggressive system and bypass more air and fuel, what it does is it results in the engine still making power when the driver's off throttle. And what this results in is, particularly when the driver's on the brakes, it tends to want to make the car push. Now, some drivers can handle that and don't mind it. Some drivers, this can be very, very off-putting. So this kind of limits how aggressive we can go with a conventional anti-lag strategy. So this system, coming back to our Instagram post, Fresh Air Anti-Lag, what it does is it takes compressed air straight from the charge pipe. And this little guy up here is actually just a conventional wastegate, essentially. TurboSmart actually make their own Fresh Air Anti-Lag system using a wastegate. So basically we have fresh air going in here from our charge piping. Then you can see there's like a bit of a sort of spider arrangement here of pipes that feed out to the exhaust primaries on each cylinder. So the fresh air is then introduced straight into the exhaust manifold. So we don't need to open the throttle bypass anymore. We don't need to bypass air in that way. And by regulating the the airflow into the exhaust system, the extra fuel that is being delivered, along with ignition retard, we can get a very, very aggressive anti-lag strategy, which still maintains the drivability of the car. Now, a question we had on this is this relevant for road car use? Well, yes, you could use it for a road car, but in all honesty, this is very pigeonholed towards race applications. And it does put a lot of stress on the turbo components, creates a lot of heat. So it's not something that I would recommend for a road car application. All right, moving on, I just also wanted to mention our latest HPA Tuned In podcast episodes, and I'll just head over to my laptop screen here. You can find this for yourself by heading to hpa-tunedin.com. I've got a couple that we've just released since our last members webinar. Last release this week is actually quite interesting. We talked to Peter Knight, who is an electrical engineer on the Emirates Team New Zealand America's Cup team. So we find out some of the ins and outs of motorsport wiring as it applies to the field of America's Cup yacht racing. So you might be surprised that there's still a lot of technology that translates across nicely. Last week's one, we also had an interview with Scott Hilsinger from Haltech. If you have followed Mighty Car Mods or Scott himself, he's also referred to as the Tuning Fork, a bit of a celebrity in the tuning industry, particularly in the Southern Hemisphere. Scott's been with Haltech for over 20 years, so we talked to him about the maturity of ECUs these days, the technology that he's seen develop. We talked to him about some of his own tuning strategies. One of the key ones we talk about here is, do you need to blow up engines in order to learn how to tune? That's a question we often get asked when we are running our webinars. So if you are a podcast listener, please make sure you check out HPA Tuned In podcast. You can find that wherever you listen listen to podcasts already. Make sure you subscribe as well and give us a rating and review. We'd really appreciate that. Right, lastly for today, I just want to mention we have got a video on our YouTube channel that came out a few days ago, and this is about the technology used for wheel alignments even at the highest levels of motorsport. So this is from the Jota team on their Oreca LMP2 race car. So it's a Le Mans prototype car. I just want to go back here and just pause it there. So we have a wheel alignment course out that is targeted at grassroots enthusiasts through to semi-professional motorsport enthusiasts who want to learn how to make wheel alignment adjustments to their car at the racetrack. Why would you want to do this? Well, one of the reasons is that if you are relying on a wheel alignment workshop to do your alignments, two problems potentially with that. One, if they're not familiar with race car setup, it is probable that you're not going to get an optimal setup for your particular car. However, yes, there are some wheel alignment workshops out there who do specialize in working on race cars. They obviously know what they're doing and can get you great results. But even then, what happens if you've got the perfect setup for a dry track and you turn up and it starts hosing down with rain? The correct or optimal alignment settings for a dry track are definitely going to be dramatically different to what you'd run on a wet track. So being able to do your own wheel alignments affords you that flexibility to make these adjustments. And the techniques we use include using strings for the alignment. And I know that on face value this sounds a little bit backyardish, but trust me, it is not, as shown here by Jota Sport using exactly the same basic technology. And you'll see this basically in the pits at any race event, right up to the highest echelons of professional motorsport. So it is a very valid technique. Admittedly, the technology that Jota are putting into this, including, you can see here, this big CNC machined alloy setup hub, that's definitely a bit beyond the budget of most enthusiasts, but this is what you will find at most race teams. But the premise behind it is still exactly the same. If you are interested, check out that video on our YouTube. And again, if you aren't subscribed to our YouTube channel, please make sure you do so. And if you are interested in learning more about our wheel alignment fundamentals course, you can find that at hpacademy.com/courses. All right, we'll finish up just with a reminder there, the giveaway for our Holley Terminator X Max ECU and our HPA VIP deal. That's got 29 days to run. Again, I'll get Scott to drop a link into the comments you can follow to get your name into the draw. Remember, no purchase required. It's absolutely free, and there are a few other tasks you can complete to get a few more entries into the draw. Give yourself the best chance of winning. All right, give me a few moments here and we'll get started with today's lesson.
If you like that video, make sure you give it a thumbs up, and if you're not already a subscriber, make sure you're subscribed. We release a new video every week. And if you like free stuff, we've got a great deal for you. Click the link in the description to claim your free spot to our next live lesson.